Sarah smiled like a woman who had never been corrected in public. "This area is reserved for invited guests only," she said softly. "You may want to check with security before you embarrass yourself, or use the service entrance if you're looking for staff coordination." A few nearby guests laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it was safer than not laughing. Chantel turned her glass once, then set it down. "You're loud for someone who hasn't earned the room," Chantel said. "That's dangerous here." Sarah blinked slightly. "Excuse me?" "You looked at me," Chantel continued evenly, "and decided I should shrink to make you comfortable." Chantel set her glass down. "Let me make this simple," she said. "I don't take instructions from women who confuse confidence with ownership." Sarah didn't respond. She simply glanced once toward the side of the room. A guard stepped forward. "Ma'am," a guard said carefully, "we'll need to verify." Chantel didn't even look at him. Her hand was already in her clutch. Slow, controlled. And as she moved, something gold slipped from beneath her collar. A tiger mid-stride. Minjae stopped. Nothing else in the room moved correctly after that. He stepped forward, and the room instinctively made space for him. His voice cut through the silence. "She doesn't go near a service entrance." Then, quieter, "You don't redirect her." And, just like that, the room stopped belonging to anyone who thought they controlled it. Because the man who just stepped forward doesn't move unless something has already shifted underneath the surface. Stay with me. And if this is your first time here, subscribe, because what just started in that ballroom is only the beginning of what's about to break this city open. For 3 days afterward, the necklace was all he could see when he closed his eyes. Rain. A jazz melody coming through floorboards. The smell of antiseptic. A voice that was steady when it had every reason not to be. He sat in his office and turned the fragmented images over like evidence, trying to assemble them into something coherent, and kept arriving at the same incomplete picture. Chantel, meanwhile, had returned to her work and her life and her established policy of not thinking about wealthy families and their exhausting internal politics. She had patience. She had obligations. She had a carefully constructed emotional distance from things that were not her problem. Then Kang Yoon-suk called. "I want to apologize in person," the older woman said. "What happened at the gala was disgraceful, and I was not there in time to stop it." "You don't need to apologize," Chantel said. "It wasn't your doing." "No, but I'm still sorry." A pause. "Come to dinner. Friday evening. Small. Just family." "I appreciate that, but..." "Please," Yoon-suk said quietly. "Don't let one foolish girl stop me from knowing someone I genuinely liked." Chantel was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Friday evening." The Kang family home was the kind of house that had been beautiful for so long it no longer needed to try. Yoon-suk met Chantel at the door personally and held both her hands in greeting. Minji's mother, a composed woman named Park Hyejin, welcomed her with careful warmth. Minjae was already seated at the table when Chantel entered the dining room. He stood when she came in. She acknowledged him with a brief nod and sat across from him, and for the first 20 minutes of dinner gave him approximately the same emotional attention she gave the flower arrangement at the center of the table. That was new. Minjae noticed it immediately and did not know what to do with it. Women at his family table typically worked very hard to capture his attention. This one was having a focused conversation with his mother about postoperative care protocols and appeared to have genuinely forgotten he was there. His mother asked Chantel how she had come to specialize in trauma surgery. Something changed in Chantel's posture. Not a relaxing, exactly more a shift, the way a person shifts when they move from performing to actually speaking. Because trauma surgery is the only field where you're constantly solving a problem that is actively trying to kill you, she said. Every other decision you can approach carefully. In trauma, you have to be right and fast simultaneously, and most of the time nobody has told you enough of the story yet. She paused. "I find that honest. I know exactly what I'm fighting." Yoon-suk was watching her with undisguised admiration. Minjae was watching her too. Not at her face exactly, at the way she spoke. The particular quality of her steadiness. The way she talked about pressure like it was simply the landscape of her life, rather than something she survived. He recognized it. He just couldn't locate where from. Sarah sat at the far end of the table and cut her food into precise, quiet pieces. After dinner, while the family moved to the sitting room, Sarah appeared at Chantel's side in the hallway. Women become very confused around Minjae, she said, pleasantly, conversationally. The way someone delivers a warning disguised as friendly observation. They mistake his attention for affection. Chantel picked up the cup of tea a staff member had just handed her. Then maybe you should ask yourself why your fiancé keeps giving his attention to other women. She walked into the sitting room. Sarah stayed in the hallway for a long moment, alone. Over the following weeks, Chantel and Minjae kept colliding in the structured, unavoidable way that happened when two people moved in overlapping professional worlds and someone's grandmother was quietly engineering proximity. Hospital charity meetings. A medical foundation board event. A formal dinner connected to an international partnership the Kang Group was funding. Each time, the conversation between them grew a layer. Nothing romantic. Nothing declared. Just two people who were discovering that the other person's mind was more interesting than they had initially budgeted for. Minjae was calmer when she was nearby. He noticed it the way you notice a headache is gone only by the absence of tension you had stopped registering as unusual. You never seem impressed by anything, he said one afternoon, at the edge of a hospital charity reception they were both quietly trying to leave. Chantel considered this. I'm a trauma surgeon. My baseline for impressive is set very high. What would clear it? She looked at him. Surviving something you weren't supposed to survive. And becoming someone different because of it instead of just harder. He held her gaze for a second longer than was strictly neutral. Why different instead of harder? Because hard is easy, she said. Different means something actually changed. He thought about that for the rest of the evening. The memories kept surfacing in pieces. Rain hitting his skylight. The pressure of bandages on his side. A woman's hands that were precise and unhurried despite everything happening outside. A man's voice downstairs, low and even, keeping watch. And underneath all of it, jazz, slow and complicated, the kind that felt like it understood grief. He started pulling old files. Quietly. Carefully. Not yet sure what he was looking for, but increasingly certain he needed to find it. It was a Thursday night when he found her sitting outside the hospital on a concrete bench in her scrubs, and for the first time in every encounter they'd had, Chantel Williams looked exhausted in a way she wasn't managing. He had come for a foundation meeting that had ended early. He almost walked past. Then he didn't. He sat beside her without asking. Not close. Just present. She didn't acknowledge him immediately, and he didn't push. The city moved around them. Ambulance lights pulsed in the distance. Someone on an upper floor was running. Then she said quietly, he was 26. No family history. Came in with a clean scan, and by the time we opened him there was nothing left to save. She paused. I did everything right. Every single decision was correct. And it didn't matter. Minjae said nothing for a moment. Then, sometimes it doesn't. I know, she said. I know it doesn't. I've known it for years. She exhaled slowly. Knowing it doesn't make it easier to sit with. No, he said quietly. It doesn't. She turned and looked at him. Really looked at him, for the first time without the professional distance she kept precisely measured between them. You actually understand that, she said. Not a question. An observation. Like she had expected him to say something generic and was recalibrating. I've made correct decisions that cost people their lives, he said. And wrong decisions that somehow didn't. You stop looking for the logic eventually. She held his gaze. The air between them shifted into something neither of them moved to name. You should go home, he said finally. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't. She stood slowly, and he stood with her, and for a moment they were very close in the quiet outside the hospital. She stepped back first. Thank you, she said. For sitting. Anytime, he said. She walked back inside. He stood in the cold for a while longer, and the memory finally cracked open fully, her hands pressing gauze against his side, her voice saying, stay awake, stay with me, and he felt the ground shift underneath 7 years of his life. He ended the engagement 11 days later. He sat across from Sarah in the formal sitting room of the family home and told her the engagement was finished. He did not do it cruelly. He did not do it with anger. He simply told her the truth that he had been emotionally done with the arrangement for years, that he had postponed twice out of obligation, and that he was not going to postpone again. Sarah was very still. Is this about the surgeon? It's about us, he said. There is no us. There has never been an us, and you know it. Your family will want an explanation. My family will want me to be honest. That's what I'm doing. She left the house with her composure intact and her jaw set and her hands folded in front of her like she was already calculating next steps. What Min-jae didn't know yet was that she had been calculating next steps long before this conversation. 3 evenings later, at a small family gathering, Sarah saw Chantel's tiger pendant for the first time properly close, under good lighting, in full detail. The tiger mid-stride. Gold worn smooth. A very specific, very distinctive piece. Something snagged in Sarah's memory. She spent the rest of the evening trying to locate it. By the time she got home, she had opened her father's old files on her laptop, files she had accessed twice before in her life, files that contained the operational history of the previous decade's most important maneuvers. An old raid. A neighborhood in Itaewon. A jazz club. A tiger pendant documented in a photograph as belonging to the owner's daughter. Sarah sat back in her chair and felt everything she had built begin to crack. She called her father. The woman Min-jae is involved with, she said carefully. Her name is Chantel Williams. Her father was Isaiah Williams. A long silence on the other end. You're certain? I saw the necklace. Another silence. Then her father said, I'll handle it. Chantel started noticing things that didn't quite fit. A car that appeared near her building on consecutive mornings. A credentialing committee that suddenly requested a second review of her international partnership documents. Routine process, except that the request came through an unusual channel. A colleague mentioning that someone had called the hospital asking detailed questions about her schedule. She was not naive. She was also not frightened. She was, however, paying attention. Min-jae was paying attention too. He had been quietly building a picture from fragments for weeks, financial irregularities in old accounts, names that kept surfacing in documentation from years before the engagement, a timeline that kept aligning in ways that should have been impossible. He had brought in one trusted man from his inner circle, and together they had started reconstructing the architecture of something that had been hidden directly inside his family. Then one night, late, Chantel left the hospital through the rear exit, and 2 men were waiting near her car. She saw them before they saw her. She stepped back into the shadow of the building immediately and called Min-jae, not because she had decided to depend on him, but because she had assessed her options in approximately 4 seconds and chosen the most efficient one. He answered on the second ring. Don't move, he said. I'm 12 minutes away. I'm fine, she said quietly. They haven't seen me. I know you're fine. Don't move anyway. She stayed where she was in the shadow, watching the 2 men with the flat, analytical attention she applied to complex surgical situations. Calm. Observant. Annoyed, primarily. Min-jae arrived in 9 minutes. He came with 2 men from his own security, and the interaction in the parking lot was brief, cold, and conclusive. When he walked back to where she was standing, she had her arms crossed and was watching him with an expression that was not entirely readable. This is connected to Sarah's family, he said. Not a question. Tell me what you know, she said. So he did. All of it. Standing in a hospital parking lot at 11:45 at night, he told her about the financial trail, the timeline, the engagement as a strategic placement, the long infiltration of his family disguised as alliance. He watched her face as he spoke. She processed information the same way she likely processed surgical crises, no emotional static, just intake and assessment. Then he said, 7 years ago. The jazz club in Itaewon. She went very still. I was there, he said. Your father hid me. You treated my wounds all night. He paused. I was barely conscious. But I remember your voice. I remember your hands. And I remember him downstairs keeping watch over a man he had no obligation to protect. Chantel was quiet for a long time. You didn't know, she said finally. It wasn't an accusation. It was a woman working through something. I believed it was retaliation from enemies who had been tracking me, he said. I spent years believing that. I never had evidence pointing elsewhere. He held her gaze. I'm sorry. I know what that doesn't cover. She looked away from him, at the lights across the hospital parking lot. Her father had died guarding a man she was now standing beside in a dark parking lot 7 years later. Isaiah Williams, who had played jazz at 2 in the morning when the club was empty and the neighborhood was asleep, who had looked at a bleeding stranger collapsed in his doorway and said bring him inside without another thought, who had paid for that decision with his life. When she looked back at Min-jae, something had shifted between them. Not softer, deeper. The kind of shift that happens when two people understand they have been connected by something older and heavier than either of them chose. Finish it, she said. He spent 3 weeks building the case with the precision of a man who understood that what he was constructing had to be unassailable. Financial records pulled across multiple accounts and 4 years of transactions. Surveillance documentation. Internal communications recovered through channels that didn't officially exist. A timeline mapped across every major decision the Yu family had made in connection to the Kang organization, starting from before the engagement was ever proposed. The ambush 7 years ago. Ordered by Yu Keelman after Isaiah Williams was identified as having sheltered the Kang heir during the chaos of the betrayal. The jazz club fire. Isaiah's death. Chantel's near miss. All of it traced back to a man who had been sitting at family dinners for 3 years and smiling across the table. The formal dinner was a board event, both families present, senior members of several allied organizations, a gathering significant enough that dismantling someone publicly within it would constitute total destruction of everything they had built. Min-jae had chosen it deliberately. He let dinner proceed through 3 courses. He let conversations run. He let Yu Keelman sit at the far end of the table looking like a man who believed he still controlled the situation. Then Min-jae stood. Before dessert, he said, there's something the people in this room need to understand about what has been operating inside this family. He spoke for 11 minutes. He did not raise his voice once. He presented the financial evidence, the operational timeline, the documentation of the ambush, the fire, and 7 years of strategic infiltration through an arranged engagement that had been designed from the beginning as a mechanism of access and eventual destruction. He named every person connected to every decision. The room came apart quietly first, then loudly. Yu Keelman tried to deny it. Min-jae placed a specific financial transfer document in front of 3 separate board members simultaneously. The denial lasted approximately 40 seconds. Sarah sat at the table with her hands folded in her lap, and for the first time in the years Min-jae had known her, she had no composure to perform. Just a woman watching everything end, looking across the table at Chantel Williams, who had not moved and was not performing either. Just present. Just watching. The woman who had been signaled to security at a gala now sitting at the center of a room full of powerful people while the woman who had made that gesture was arrested beside her father. Sarah looked at Chantel with pure hatred as the authorities moved toward her. Chantel looked back with something Sarah could not metabolize, not triumph, not contempt. Just the settled, unshakable calm of a woman who had never needed to perform anything to know exactly who she was. Weeks passed. The cases moved through channels that operated largely outside public visibility, the way such things did when they involved the intersecting machinery of organized business and older, darker operations. What emerged publicly was a major fraud investigation. Several arrests. The quiet dissolution of a number of business relationships that had looked healthy from the outside. The Kang family home was lighter now. That was the only way Min-jae knew to describe it. As though a weight that had been distributed through every room for years had simply been removed. Yoon-suk took to calling Chantel every few days, ostensibly to ask her medical opinions on various things, but actually, Chantel suspected, simply because she enjoyed talking to her. Min-jae's mother had begun treating her with the particular warm consideration that families extended to people who had moved from acquaintance to something less categorizable. Chantel still kept her own life, her own apartment, her own careful arrangement of independence. But she was spending Friday evenings at the Kang family home with a regularity that had stopped requiring explanation. And the conversation she and Min-jae had on those evenings had grown into something that occupied her thoughts in the quiet between surgeries, between meetings, between the structured moments of a life she had built around not needing much from other people. He was different with her than he was with anyone else. Not softer, she didn't think he would ever be soft exactly, and she didn't want that from him. But honestly, genuinely present in the specific way of someone who had spent years being absent from his own life and had recently, carefully returned. On a Friday evening in late autumn, dinner ended and Yoon-suk called it the best meal of the season and disappeared into the kitchen with Hyejin to argue cheerfully about the dessert. Chantel was finishing her tea. Min-jae was across the table, quiet in the comfortable way they had developed for silences. Then he stood up. Chantel looked at him. He was standing very still, and there was something in his expression she had never seen before in all the months she had known him. Kang Min-jae, who walked through ambushes and boardroom coups and the systematic dismantling of a 7-year conspiracy with the same controlled composure, was looking at her like he wasn't entirely sure the ground was solid. He reached into his pocket. The ring was simple. Gold. A single setting, clean and unhurried, nothing performing anything. Yoon-suk had come back to the doorway without Chantel noticing. Hyejin was behind her. 7 years ago, Min-jae said, your father told me to become someone worth surviving for. His voice was steady. His hands were not completely. I've spent every day since trying. Chantel set down her tea. I'm not asking you to forgive a debt, he said. I'm not asking you to carry what your father gave without choosing to. He looked at her directly, and the exhaustion she had seen in him the night she first sat beside him outside the hospital was entirely gone, replaced by something clear and unguarded and real. I'm asking if you'll let me spend the rest of my life proving I became what he believed I could. The room was completely silent. Outside, Seoul moved in its relentless way. Inside there was only the particular stillness of a moment that had been building through 7 years of loss and distance, and two people finding each other in the wreckage of something that had tried to destroy them both. Chantel looked at him for a long moment. At the ring. At his face. At the man her father had hid under the floorboards of his life and apparently believed in. You finally became someone my father would have liked, she said quietly. Then she said yes. Yoon-suk made a sound that was entirely undignified and did not care at all. Hyejin was pressing her hands together, beaming. Min-jae slid the ring onto Chantel's finger, and she let him, and the expression on his face in that moment was the truest thing she had ever seen from him, open, unhurried, grateful in a way that had nothing to do with performance. He sat back down beside her. Not across from her. Beside her. And for the first time in years, Kang Min-jae looked like a man who had finally arrived somewhere he intended to stay. If you stayed through to the end, you already know what to do. Make sure you subscribe, like the video, turn on notifications so you don't miss more stories like this, and share it. So tell me, what part of the story hit you the most? And did you see that twist coming? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching.